Welcome to the Nerdstalgic podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
Howdy beans, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Nerdstalgic podcast with me, your host Luke. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're good as per usual. Before we get into it, I just want to say, if you're not following me on Twitter yet, now's your chance. You can follow me on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod to keep up to date with all the movies, video games, TV shows, and all the lovely nerdy things that I am doing and looking into and all that jazz. And if you listen to this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, because comments really do mean a lot. Likes are fantastic, but if you can leave a comment, would absolutely be ace. So leave a comment, like, and subscribe. Wonderful. So today's topic, today's movie I'm going to be watching is Black Panther 2, Wakanda Forever. I know it's a bit late. I'm a bit late behind this one. There's multiple reasons, and I'll get into that in story time in a minute. But I finally get around. Well, actually, tell a lie, I haven't got around to watching Black Panther 2 yet. The reason being is because if you remember a couple of episodes ago, I believe it was for Ice Age 2 that I decided to do the introduction first before I watched the movie. For anybody who's returning or anybody who is new, basically what I mean by that is what I used to do for my sort of movie reviews or games or that sort of thing was that I would do the introduction first, and then I would have already watched the movie. Then I would have, as soon as I've done the introduction, I'd go straight into the review. But I wanted to try something different. So for my Ice Age 2 review, even though I've watched that film loads and loads of times, I haven't seen it in a good few years. So the idea was that I wanted to do my introduction, do story time, give my initial sort of memories, what I remember from the last time I watched it years and years ago, and then then go into the review and kind of see by the end of that review if my views had changed, if they were still good, if they were still positive, if I still liked the movie as much as I did when I was younger, that sort of thing. I've only ever done it one other time, which was with the Ice Age. This will be the second time that I'm doing it, and I feel like it'd be interesting. Because as I'm about to talk about in the story time, I have sort of conflicting sort of views when it comes to the whole Black Panther sort of series. So I'd like to kind of see myself personally how I feel about this movie. Because considering how I felt about the first movie, it also adds into the reason why it took me so long to get around to it. So without further ado, it's story time. So as I mentioned in just a few seconds ago, I've seen Black Panther 1. I saw it in cinemas when it first released. And I'll be honest, I love T'Challa. I love the Black Panther character. I love him mostly from the comics. His stories are incredible. I love the stories where he's married to Storm. Absolutely amazing. So I was looking forward to when they were going to introduce him into the Avengers, really. They're going to bring him into the movies. Because originally, and this is before Sony and Marvel did their Spider-Man deal, I believe, and again, I don't know if this is true or not, but I believe originally that Black Panther was going to be their new sort of poster boy. Because they bought Chadwick Boseman out, and they said Black Panther, and he was a new big thing. He's going to be in Captain America Civil War. It was going to be huge. It was going to be wonderful. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And then there were rumblings that, Sony and Marvel were having a bit of a chat, and there was something going on between them. But nobody was really sure. And then that trailer dropped. And it was, oh my God, Black Panther. And right at the end, Spider-Man does his black flip and catches Captain America's shield. And everybody lost their shit. And everybody just kind of looked over Black Panther. I didn't. I love Spider-Man. I was like, wow, Spider-Man. But I was still like, oh, Black Panther. Wakanda forever, man. I'm there. And then the movie came out, and I love Chadwick Boseman. Like, again, he's like Chadwick Boseman to me was very much like I'm trying to think. What's his name now? Twilight Boy. I'm blanking on his name. Robert Pattinson. He reminds me of Robert Pattinson in a way. Whereas, like, he's done a lot of amazing roles, just not many people have seen them. Now, unlike Robert Pattinson and Chadwick Boseman, Robert Pattinson was a really big name before he kind of got the chance of being Batman, and Chadwick Boseman wasn't really much of a big name, but he had been in a lot of amazing films, and he was always the standout. So I always remember seeing the guy, and then saw him walk on stage. I thought, I recognise that name, Chadwick Boseman. Where do I recognise it from? And then to see the guy's face, oh my god, that's the movie from 42. If you haven't watched the movie 42, it's a baseball movie. I shouldn't really like it because I'm English, but generally, it's an incredible film. Go watch it. It's amazing, right? But I was like, oh my god, that's the guy from 42, and it was just like I can't wait to see what he would do as T'Challa. So when the movie came out, and I finally saw it. One of my highlights was actually meeting um, T'Challa, meeting Black Panther, finding out, getting the hints here and there of Wakanda, having the little bits of like the sort of hints at Claw and stuff like that. And it was really, really sort of interesting, fascinating, and like I still have a theory like there was something between Bucky and um, T'Challa because like when they first meet when Bucky's trying to break out of the prison, right? T'Challa he fights him and he goes hand down to him and he does pretty good job, right? And they never did anything with this. But my head canon, when they're fighting, there's a moment where T'Challa has I would imagine, is a vibranium ring. And when T'Challa's ring got close to Bucky's arm, it started to react, and Bucky's arm started to move. And then sort of T'Challa kind of looks up at like Bucky in that kind of surprise, like, "Oh God, your arm's made out of vibranium," or something like that. Again, it was never really went into there was never anything that ever sort of explained that. They never explored it, but I'd like to think in my head canon it was that kind of that moment. So thinking, "Oh my God, he's got a vibranium arm. Where did he get that arm from?" You know what I mean? I don't think Bucky had a vibranium arm, to be honest. I think he only got his vibranium arm when he actually went to Wakanda after the end of Civil War, and he kind of went there for a rehabilitation when they kind of fixed his brain. Um, but I don't know, it was just a little thing. But again, I love that cool little interaction. So that being said, fast forward all the way to them announcing they're going to do a Black Panther movie. I was happy. I was excited. I was over the moon. I love T'Challa. Civil War is one of my favorite Captain America movies. Actually, number one favorite Captain America movie is Captain America 2. I love that one. That's my absolute favorite Captain America, the Winter Soldier. It's just incredible. So I was excited to see more T'Challa, to see more Chadwick, and then the movie came out. Me and my dad, and my brother, we went to go see it, and I'll be honest with you, I was disappointed. Mainly because the movie is very, very slow. It takes a long time for anything to be get going, and the only interesting parts are the parts where you actually have Black Panther and Chadwick on the screen being Black Panther when he's, having his banter with his sister. Those bits are cool, those bits are funny. Or then you've got M'Baku and you have the fight with him and M'Baku. That bit's really interesting. That bit's really fascinating. But then you had the really boring, stagnant parts that just went on for too long. And generally, this was the first time in any Marvel movie where I've sat and watched it in the cinema and out loud yawned, just yawned, looked at my watch of like this is boring. Like I don't, and it was such a letdown. And again, the movie's quite long. I'm not saying it's a bad movie; it's a good movie, but it's a movie that was like, I don't really need to watch this again. Unlike Guardians of the Galaxy or uh, trying to think, Avengers, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, like even Thor: The Dark World. I've seen that movie more than once. Now, I be honest, I quite like Thor: The Dark World. I know it's a dark horse, and many people don't like it, but I generally like Thor: The Dark World, and I've seen that film multiple times. Whereas this one, really, I've only ever watched it once all the way through, and every other time I've seen it, periodically in bits here and there. As it was just, I don't know, it was just a shame, really. I had hoped for more out of it. And then obviously as the movies went on and we got to see more T'Challa and we got to see Infinity War and he was badass and he gave Steve those really cool like dagger shield cuffling things. Amazing. Then we had I cried, like everybody cried, but like in Endgame where T'Challa walks through and I'm literally in tears and then I see T'Challa and he's smiling and I'm like, oh man, yeah, he's back, and all this is just so much emotion, so much love for the character. I love T'Challa. I loved Chadwick Boseman's take on T'Challa. Like Tony Stark and Iron Man and Robert Downey Jr. They're all one person. Like you can't have Iron Man without Robert Downey Jr. They're just the same character now. They're entwined, and it took quite a while for Robert Downey Jr. to get to that point. Whereas for me, T'Challa and Chadwick Boseman, instantly I was like, yeah, that is T'Challa straight away. Like there was no couple movies. It was just Civil War. That's T'Challa. The Black Panther reinforced it. That is T'Challa. You know what I mean? And from there, like it just got better and better and better and better and better. Um, so I was excited, when they announced that they were going to do a Black Panther 2. I was really, really happy. I thought, you know what, the first one wasn't great, but where Endgame leaves off, there's a lot of things they can do. There's a lot of things they can go. They can bring in Namor. They can bring in eventually maybe the X-Men. They can bring in Claw. They can bring in Doctor Doom potentially. The whole idea of like now Wakanda's becoming more of an open state and of an open sort of known about city. How about bringing Latveria? How would Latveria feel? But run by Doctor Doom. You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing. Like there's other things they could go. So I was really excited to see what direction they would go in. Obviously, sadly, the news came that Chadwick Boseman had passed away from an illness. And I'll be honest with you, I wept. I cried. I sobbed. When I learned, I couldn't believe it. I genuinely started to cry because, granted, yes, I didn't like the movie, but I loved him as a character. I loved him as an actor. Like I said, he's an underrated actor. And what hurt me the most was the fact of, I'm getting emotional now talking about it, to be honest, but what killed me the most and what hurt me the most was he was ill and he was really, really sort of painfully ill, but he was still pushing himself to be the Black Panther, to be physically fit, to go to the gym, to be in that role, to not let anybody down, to do all the fight scenes himself and that sort of thing. He was fighting for it because he believed and his family believed that he would survive his illness, that he wasn't going to get him, and eventually, sadly, it did. But that's what made me love him so much was the fact of he was still making movies even though he was really badly ill. You know what I mean? And that's just it's a beautiful but a sad thing. And this is why I say that Chadwick Boseman is an underrated actor, and he was an underrated actor. He only really until he became T'Challa that people really knew who he was. Um, you know, and it's a shame. But I applaud people now. To go out and to watch other Black Panther, other Chadwick Boseman movies, to go and watch the films that started him off, and then to watch the movie. I think one of the last movies well, I don't think it was the last movie he made. It could have been either the last movie he made or the last movie that was released posthumous, after his passing, was I think a movie called 12 Bridges. I think it's called on Netflix. It's a good film. I liked it. It didn't do very well, sadly. So probably not a lot of people had seen it. But if I remember correctly, it's called 12 Bridges, and it was done by the Russo brothers who did Endgame and Captain America and Infinity War. I liked it. I thought it was a good film. And if anything, Chadwick Boseman, he shines in the lead role. So if anything, even if the movie's bad, he still is, the clowning, gory. He's the reason to watch that film. So yeah, so going into Black Panther 2, as I said, I haven't seen it yet, but going to Black Panther 2, I don't know how I'm going to feel because, like, the only reason I liked Black Panther 1 was because T'Challa. The best parts were the Killmonger parts, was the T'Challa parts, were the parts that had, Black Panther had Chadwick Boseman in it, or Michael B. Jordan, and that sort of thing. And as far as I know, there's been no talk and there's been no say if Michael B. Jordan is in this film. Obviously, Chadwick Boseman, he passed away before this movie was filmed. They actually had to change the script, so the movie's completely different to what they were going to do originally. For T'Challa, I think the original idea that T'Challa was going to have a son or something like that. So I don't know how I'm going to feel because now the one person that I love this franchise for is now gone, and they didn't recast him, which I still think, again, that's a completely different sort of topic, and I won't get into it because I'll be here for ages. I still think that they should have recast Black Panther. I still think they should have recast T'Challa, but they didn't want to do it. They wanted one T'Challa, and that T'Challa is Chadwick Boseman, which I completely understand, I completely respect. But I feel like, again, I never met the man, sadly, but I just feel like Chadwick Boseman probably would have liked that role to go on. But again, it's neither here nor there. So yeah, it's going to be weird. It's going to be difficult to watch this movie without Chadwick Boseman. And I think that's what gets me is going to get me the most with this film. Like they're going to have to do something that's going to really hook me and interest me to keep me into, because this is almost a 2 hour long film, right? So there's got to be something in this 2 hours that's really got to pull me in. So we'll see. We'll see. But that's my introduction. That's story time. I just wanted to kind of lay my cards down on the table and let you Beans know that I wasn't a fan of the first one, that I loved and idolized Chadwick Boseman more so after he passed as well, just to kind of him being ill and him fighting through it and how sort of beautiful and courageous that whole is. And that I don't know how I'm going to feel. Like I'll be honest with you, I'm going to go in to this movie a glass empty. So any sort of feelings I have for it, any sort of doubt, I'm going to put them to one side. I'm going to put the movie on, and I'm going to pull it to one side. I'm just going to watch it and experience it for what it is, brand new, and I'm going to give you my thoughts and feelings from there. And I'm going to try my best to not let any personal opinion cloud it. I'm just going to go in and going to say, I like this, I like that, done. But I feel like that's more fair, because if I sit here and I moan about not like it because they didn't recast, then we'd be here all day. So I'm going to go in, and I'm going to go in fresh. And when you hear the next bit, I'd watch the movie. So I'm going to go watch the film now, and we're going to get onto the review right now. So see you in a minute. Wakanda Forever. So I've just finished watching the movie. The way I've decided to do this is going to be a bit different. Usually I have my notes and I just read about them all and then we'll go from there. But what I've decided to do with my notes, I've set them out in two sections. So, actually three sections. So you've got the good, could have been better, and overall thoughts. This way, I think it might be a bit different. As you Beans would know, if you're a casual listener or if you're listening for the first time, what I like to do is I like to try new things, like to experiment. I'm always changing things, always experimenting. If I find something that works, I'll stick with it. If it doesn't work, I'll change it. So with this review, I decided to do something a little bit different than usual and see how it goes. So I'm going to start off with the good. So things that I liked and all that jazz. So first of all, this was better than the first film. I enjoyed it a lot more. It's way better. The pacing and the action and the story all made sense. With this film, one thing I found with the first movie was that, again, because they had to set up who the Black Panther was, even though we already had the Black Panther character T'Challa from Captain America: Civil War, we had to kind of set up the world of Wakanda, set up the people of Wakanda, the actual sort of backstory behind it all. And again, that's fine. That's understandable. That wasn't the bit that bored me. The bit that bored me was the pacing. The pacing was off. You'd have the short, you'd have short sprints of action and interest, and then you'd have long drawn out sections of just boring scenes. Sometimes the dialogue would be interesting, other times the dialogue wouldn't be. But with this movie, it was, long sprints of action, and then you'd get short dialogue, short sort of interesting sections. Then you'd have the long action sequence, then you'd have the dialogue. So it's a good pace. And this is one of the things that I mentioned when I watched Thor: Love and Thunder, was the fact of that movie had lost its pacing. Like, it had fantastic action, but it focused too much on something it wasn't meant to focus on. And that was the issue, I feel like, with Black Panther, is that the focus went off. You went from the action to being things that were a bit, off from what we was actually interested in, or I was interested in, should I say, anyway. But with this movie, all the action was great, the pacing was great, it all intertwined perfectly with the story, everything made sense. Now, one thing I will mention, which I should have mentioned at the very beginning, was that this is going to be a non-spoiler review, so I'm not going to do any spoilers. I'm not going to throw anything in here that might spoil the movie. mainly, I know this movie's come out already, and it's been out for a good few months now. Especially now it's on Disney Plus, everybody can go watch it. I don't like to put spoilers in any of my reviews. I used to back in the old days in season one, but I only tend to do spoilers nowadays if I feel like I really need to, like if it would be beneficial to the review, or that I don't have a lot to say, then I'll sort of talk about the spoiler talk. Otherwise, I just tend to like to just do my thoughts and feelings of the movie, and then just kind of leave it up to you beings, you folks, um, to go off and to watch the movie, play the game, and that sort of thing, and make your own opinion, without having to spoil anything for you. So that's what I tend to try and do. Um, so that's the pace, and the pace in action is great. They handled the death of T'Challa really, really well, which I loved. I thought it's really beautiful how they handled it. Um, this well, it's a kind of a spoiler, I guess, how this movie starts, but it's not a spoiler because it's kind of obvious. So the movie basically begins with, you don't see T'Challa, you don't see Chadwick Boseman. Obviously, he passed away before they started filming the show. I mean the film. I would have liked to seen, even if they do like a de-aging, maybe like they did with like Star Wars, that sort of thing, like a de-aging version of like T'Challa, kind of like took his like a kind of like a deep fake, that sort of thing. Um, Maybe that might have been distasteful, maybe potentially. Yeah, now I think about it, probably would have been distasteful. But I guess they could have done that, and showed his face, but they didn't. They decided you don't see T'Challa. It's all sort of just impression that Suri is trying to recreate the heart-shaped herb, which gave Black Panther the powers in the comic books and as well as the film. Because at the end of the first Black Panther movie, well, near to the end, Killmonger destroys all the leaves. That means that there's no way to kind of bring another Black Panther in. So Suri's trying to do it. She gets a herb that's like 29% sort of accurate, not 100%. But she's like, screw it, this is my last chance to save my brother. Sadly, obviously, as we know, Chadwick Boseman has passed away, and they didn't recast T'Challa, so she wasn't able to save him. And this movie really just takes place a year later. But before we get to the year later, like you have this lovely, really slow but really somber, really sort of beautiful sort of send off to not just T'Challa and Black Panther, but also to Chadwick Boseman. And it was like, I feel like a lot of the tears and a lot of the emotion they actually saw in this scene were all real tears and all real emotion, which I can really do believe. Because again, it doesn't matter who Chadwick Boseman was. If you lose a friend, a colleague, or any somebody that you've worked with or that you have a good affection for, you're gonna feel emotion. Some stronger than others. So I can imagine that this group of actors, they worked with Chadwick for the first movie, so I can imagine for this one, they didn't have to act; they just had to feel. And there were many moments in this movie where there were a lot of tears, where I could be like, yeah, that's you don't even have to act like that's real tears. They probably were, because I know I would be. I know I'd be emotional wreck. If they were like cry, I'd be like, no problem. I've been holding them back this whole time. You know what I mean? So um, they did a fantastic job of actually saying goodbye, and not just to T'Challa but also Chadwick Boseman, and they did it at the start of the movie, which I thought was really classy and very well done. Um, I like also how they handled Namor, how they made him powerful and threatening. That was quite interesting. Like, I won't sit here and say that I'm a big fan of Namor. I won't lie to you, Beans, and say that I know everything about Namor, because honestly, I don't. I like Namor as a character, but the only time I've ever actually read anything to do with Namor is when he's been involved with the Avengers, either against the Avengers or working with the Avengers. But apart from that, like I don't read Namor comics. I think there probably are Namor comics, but I'm not really interested in Namor the Submariner. He's not the most interesting character in my opinion, but I like how they took the character and they changed him. So he's no longer an Atlantean. He's he's a Telecan. I think that's how they pronounce it. And I liked how they made him sort of more Aztec-y, more Mexican roots, which I loved. I thought that was a fantastic change because, like, we already had Aquaman and Atlantis. So because we've already had that sort of world, and quite recently, and obviously we've got Aquaman 2, so we've had the Atlantis, that they had to change Atlantis with Namor to Talakan and made him Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, which is a real god in the Aztec lore and mythology as well. So I thought that was fascinating. I like that change, but also they made Namor is actually a mutant in the comic books, and they've actually stuck with that, and they've also made Namor the first mutant. Now I know that we had Miss Marvel, and I think Miss Marvel came out for Black Panther Wakanda Forever, so she is kind of like the first. She was the first reveal of the first mutant, but she wasn't the first mutant. The first mutant was Namor, because he is the first one, because he's been around since the 1500s, 1557 or 1558. I think that was around about when he was born. So I like that. I like how they brought that in, and how they sort of brought in the interest of the characters, like made the character a bit more interesting. Like this version of the character, I'm more interested in. And if this is what they go for, and they decide to run with this sort of retelling the character in the comic books, I might be interested in reading more Namor. But again, as it stands, I'd like to see more of him. So, but I like how they sort of handled the character. That was really, really interesting. Also, you get to see Talocan, which is basically Atlantis, the underwater city. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's like the abyss. It was just lovely. It was like watching a James Cameron movie. Like, I haven't watched the new Avatar: Way of Water yet, but it's what I could imagine it would look like. And what I love is that we've now had two movies. We've had Aquaman, and we've had this movie. Both dealt with underwater scenes, and I always found it always made me laugh when I watched Aquaman, where you could just like everything just looked overly wet. I know it sounds quite silly because they're underwater, of course they're going to be wet, but everything just looked too like unnaturally wet. Like, yes, I know you're underwater, but things just look like unnatural to me. Whereas this, everything looked natural. Everything looked like what you'd be underwater. Like, you don't need to see the water. You know they're underwater. Yes, the hair will be floating around and all that, but you didn't need to be overly physically force fed and shown, yes, they're underwater. Look, they're underwater. Like, no, I know they're underwater. I get it. Yeah. And that's what I think with Aquaman is they this overly did it with the CGI of like making like, look, they're underwater. I'm like, look, I know, I'm watching Aquaman. Like, you don't need to explain it to me. And I liked how they handled it with the visuals and the actual how the city looked, and everything just looked very sort of Aztec-y. And I'm fascinated with the Aztecs and the Mayans, so I was all over it. I was just like, this is amazing, this is beautiful, this is gorgeous. I want to see more of this world, and I want to see more of Namor, and I want to see more of his people. Like, his people are blue, which I think is fantastic. Like, when they're underwater, they're not blue. Then when they come up to land, they're blue. I just think that's really, really cool. It's a cool sort of dynamic. It's a cool change of character. Really, really interesting. So I like how that was handled. And Angela Bassett, who plays the Queen Ramada. I did write it down, but my handwriting's terrible. Yeah, it's Ramada. She played the Queen, and she was just she was incredible, absolutely amazing. She was powerful, she was beautiful, she was scary. She this is a woman who had lost her son, who had lost her husband. She's going through the motions. Like, she lost her, like, she didn't just lose her son for this movie. I would imagine also. I don't know if she was or wasn't, but I think that she wasn't dusted, and that when everybody dusted, that she was still around. I think she was. I'm not really sure by that one, but if she was, it would make sense, because the way her performance is the fact of, I lost my son, I lost my husband, and I lost my son and my family for 4 years, only for them to come back, only to lose my son again. It's got to be heartbreaking. And even if that's not the case, even if she dusted, it's still the fact of, you come back 4 years later, the world's different, the world's changed. You're now getting back to normal, only for your son to die. It's still heartbreaking, still tragic. And she's going through the motions. And there were moments in this film where she goes through even more motions, which I won't get into. But Angela Bassett in this role is incredible. She had me scared. Like, there are generally moments of like, she's terrifying. And she's like, I'm not gonna say crazy, because that's not fair to say crazy. It's not crazy. It's sort of it's enforcement. It's like your mother telling you off. You're like, when you've done something wrong, when your mom's voice changes, when you know that you've fucked up. And it's one of those moments where your mother's voice changes. Like, oh shit, I'm in trouble, I'm gonna die. You know what I mean? It's one of those. So it's very much of like, when you hear that sound, you shut up and listen. You sit there and go, yes, I'm listening, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to touch it, I didn't mean to hit Jimmy, I'm sorry. you know and it was very forceful. It was very sort of focused, and it does a wonderful performance. So really, really well done. So well done. Um, so onto the bits that could have been better. So that was the good. That was the bits that I liked. Not a lot. Well, I did like this movie, but there wasn't a lot that I liked. But I've got more to say about the things that could be better. So what could be better, for starters, is Riri Williams, or aka Ironheart. Um, I didn't like how they introduced this character. They it just feels that, like, now Tony Stark is gone, there's that void of, like, who's going to be the next super genius. Was like, we've already got Suri. Suri, it's already been established in the first um, Black Panther movie that she is the smartest person on the planet. We haven't got Reed Richards yet. When Reed Richards gets introduced on the Fantastic Four, then he will be the smartest. But until Reed Richards comes in, it's going to be sorry, but they have to shoehorn the fact of, she is the smartest one, she is the next Tony Stark, she's a genius, she's doing this, she's building an arc reactor, she managed to build a machine that can do X, Y. I was about to do a spoiler then, but I changed it. But you know what I mean? Like, they're trying to play so much that she is this next level genius, that Suri's sitting there going, oh, she's going, you were 19 when you did this, and you were 12 when you did this, and blah 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 blah. And it's like, you can just tell that the story character, like, she's that fact of, like, gosh, she's smarter than me, and I'm like, I don't like that. I'd like, it's a new character, like, don't try to. It feels like she's being force fed to me, like I'm being forced in this character, like I'm forced to like her, that I'm forced to be like, yeah, she's a genius, she's the next Tony Stark. I'm like, no, Tony Stark is not long past, especially like, not just in the. I know it's been a couple of years since Endgame, but in the Marvel universe, that is still fresh. And in a lot of the viewers and a lot of the fans, that is still fresh, that Tony Stark has recently died. We're still reeling from the fact that Tony Stark is no longer here. That the Avengers no longer have a leader. There's no longer a Captain America. There's no longer an Iron Man, right? Doctor Strange is not the leader, and won't be the leader of the Avengers, because he's off, doing multiverse incursions, right? You haven't got any. Like, the only people that are left really are Sam, but then again, Sam is not going. Even though he's the new Captain America, he's not going to be the leader. So the only people who really could be the leader of the Avengers now would be Captain Marvel, but again, she's never really on Earth, so she couldn't be the leader, probably temporarily, but not sort of prolonged. Rhodes, James Rhodes, Iron War Machine, he could be the leader because he's got a military background, and I think he's a general now. Or Spider-Man, which, again, I know Tom Holland, he's a bit young, but again, the way they set up the last movie was that he's now becoming an adult. So I think the only person who really could probably run the Avengers now would be Peter Parker, Spider-Man. Now, again, that's up for debate, and people probably disagree. But the point is, I'm trying to get here, is the fact of, there is currently no real Avengers anymore. The leaders are gone. The team's split. We're still reeling from the fact that we survived Endgame and we lost our favorite characters. Don't try to force feed me the fact of, oh, we got this new character and she's going to be the new Iron Man. She's got her own suit, and you know what I mean? Like, just don't do that. It's too soon. It's way too soon. If you're going to introduce her in Armor Wars. That would have been where I would have introduced her. I would have brought her into Armor Wars, but no, they needed a scientist. They needed a way to explain this new sort of thing that's been invented to find this certain thing, which I won't say because it's part of the plot. But I just feel it just feels shoehorned. It feels forced, and I just don't like it. It just doesn't work for me. Also, her suit looks like she's a Power Ranger, but not a good Power. Like, I love Power Rangers. I grew up watching Power Rangers, okay, but she looks like a bad Power Ranger. Like a very sort of, like, somebody watched Power Rangers and goes, "I'm going to copy that," and just made it, and just it was worse. You know what I mean? So I don't like her suit at all. Again, the whole shoehorn and the whole sort of the suit and everything, and I just didn't like how her character was portrayed. I feel like it was a wasted opportunity, that you should have introduced her in Armor Wars, which was the Disney Plus TV show. It would make more sense for her character, and you could bring in Iron Lad, who is the little boy from Iron Man 3. Bring him in as well. Have him talk with Riri Williams. Have them bond. Then you could have Ironheart, and you could have Iron Lad, and then I don't know, whoever becomes sort of the next Iron Man from there, and then work up. But I don't know. I just feel like they sort of shoehorn this character in, and I just don't like it. But again, we'll see. We'll see what they do with the character in the future. Most likely, she probably will be in Armor Wars, but we'll see what we decide to do with her. Next is it's going to be a bit contradictory to what I said I enjoyed, but I will try to explain myself. So it was a bit too long. It had good pacing, but needed trimming. And remember what I said at the beginning of the things that I liked? Like, again, don't worry, it had good pacing between, action and story, right? But the problem is there were certain moments where even though that I enjoyed it more than sort of the first movie, that there were less moments where I was yawning and there was just moments when I was tired. Like, I actually didn't yawn at all. I didn't feel tired. I was interested all the way through. But there were certain scenes where it was they weren't needed or they could have been trimmed down. And I can't really say what certain scenes are without spoilers. I'm trying to think of one that isn't a spoiler one. Martin Freeman, for example, he's back. He plays that's the CIA bloke. He has scenes which are great, but he has scenes with another character, which again I can't mention for spoilers. He has scenes with another character that again interesting, but there's no need for that character to be there. You know what I mean? There's no need for Martin Freeman's character to have those conversations with said character. Not at the moment anyway. And, they could be trimmed down, or they could have been the fact of he could have kept hinting that my new boss is this, my new boss is that, and just kind of I'm going to have to go talk to my new boss and then quickly get back to the story and get back to the action. And then maybe near to the end of the movie, then we actually finally meet Martin Freeman's new boss, the new director of the CIA, and then it'd be like, oh, it's the big revelation, the big surprise, like this is who your new boss is, and X, Y, and Z. And I feel like if they had trimmed it down that way, it would have made it more interesting, and we could have had a more focused movie on the action, on the story, and maybe trim this movie down because this movie is a long film. It's a very long film. It's like 2 hours and 40 so minutes. And it feels longer because of these extra moments. There are moments where, like, even though the pacing's good, you still have those moments of just like, I want to get back to the story. I want to get back to the action. And I feel like that's one of the issues that I'm having with the Black Panther movies is the fact of even though this is an improvement, they still struggle with pacing. Pacing is still one of the things they just don't have a hang of yet, which is the fact of, you finally give us more action, more story, but you're still trying to force feed and jam in scenes that either weren't needed or could have been sort of left and did in such a way that when you did have the reveal, it would have been a more of a surprise, more interesting, and more like, oh my god, you know what I mean? Instead of, oh, okay, of course, his new boss knew X, Y, and Z. Which again, if you've watched the movie, you know what I mean by that. But even so, it is what it is. And finally, and this is going to sound like an odd one. It's going to be another one where I'm going to try to explain myself. This didn't feel in any way like a Marvel movie. Okay, there were certain moments in this film where it had Marvel magic, and what I mean by Marvel magic is it felt like, for example, the first Iron Man movie. It was realistic, but it had like sort of that Marvel magic where it was like a real world. You had sort of he was in the Middle East. Tony Stark was stolen, kidnapped, shall we say, by insurgents, and that they tried to get him to build them the Jericho missile, and that when doing so he lied and he ended up building his first prototype Iron Man suit, right? And again, very plausible, very real. Again, sort of the arc reactor is a little bit sort of non-plausible, but the point I'm trying to make is like it felt grounded and it kind of it worked and it made sense and it had that magic. And then as each movie went on, everything felt sort of still magical. Everything still worked. Even like Captain America: The Winter Soldier. That movie is a spy thriller. That's a very much Robert Redford sort of spy thriller, 70s sort of movie, which is kind of funny because Robert Redford's in the movie. But it worked, even though it was a spy thriller, it still felt marvelous. It still felt like I'm in this comic book world. Like it's realistic, but this is like still real and still interesting. But with this movie, it was just like, it feels like there were moments where like, oh, that feels like a Marvel movie. And then there were other moments where like, that just feels like a generic superhero movie. It just feels generic. It doesn't feel special. It feels like I know that, there's loads of movies. There's always been like there's no such thing as copyright. There's no such thing as plagiarism. Which well, okay, there is. But what I mean is the fact of everything has a root idea. There's always that origin idea, that origin concept, and everything sort of takes and borrows from each other. So authors take from other authors and take concepts and ideas and change them to work for themselves and to make a new idea. So there's no such thing as originality. Everything sort of is taken, sort of, you have the original source and everything takes from there and sort of makes it their own. And again, Marvel, again, they do it. They've done it in the comic books and they've done it with the films. So I'm not saying when I say it's something that I've seen before. What I mean when I say it's generic is that it doesn't have that magic. Like I don't watch this and go, oh, this is a Marvel movie set in the Marvel universe, and everything just feels crazy, bombastic, and wow. It's just like this could be any superhero movie in any sort of world. This could be like again, I'm not hating on the boys. I'm not saying the boys is not fantastic. I'm not saying the boys is generic, but like this movie could take place in the boys. This movie could take place in any sort of this movie could take place in the DC. This movie could take place anywhere. It doesn't feel like Marvel. I don't feel connected to the Marvel universe in this film. It doesn't have the magic, and I think that's the issue with a lot of people having with a lot of the Marvel movies of this stage, which is I think stage 4, stage 5 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that's the issue a lot of people find is that it's lost that magic. It's lost that sort of feeling. I've still had it. I've still got that sort of love, even like love. Oh God's sake, Thor: Love and Thunder. I still have that sort of care and love and appreciation for that movie, even though there were things I didn't like about it. I still enjoyed myself because it still felt like a Marvel film, even if it was kind of overly silly and overly jokey and less serious than it should have been. But with this movie, it was just, I don't know, well, not just this one, but with a lot of the things, I'm starting to slowly lose faith. And I think the reason being behind it is because before Disney Plus, the way Marvel used to be was Marvel was very contained. We're going to do 2 to 3 movies maybe every other year, or even just 2 movies a year, you know. And even 2 to 3 movies works because it's still self-contained. Kevin Feige can still kind of oversee what's going on. He can still be like, okay, just making sure that you're sticking with the timeline. Yeah, that's fine. Making sure that you're not breaking any rules. Okay, that's fine. And each movie worked. Each movie was a banger. Bang, 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 bang. All the way up to Endgame was boom, boom, boom. And even the movies that didn't do very well were still bangers, were still enjoyable, right? And then after Endgame, then Disney Plus popped off, and then we had all the Disney Plus shows, which again I love. I'm not having a go. I've enjoyed them all. Even Moon Knight, which wasn't great. Even Hawkeye wasn't great, and even She-Hulk, which I loved the She-Hulk character, but I'll admit that not every episode of that was great. But the point is, I watched it. I still enjoyed it. But what I found even with them and even with the movies, that ever since the Disney Plus thing came out, Kevin Feige's been stretched. He's been stretched. He's had to oversee multiple projects and make sure they all work. And the problem is, when you have so many things going on, multitasking is not great. People think multitasking is great. Yeah, it is if you've got like 1 or 2 things that you're multitasking. But if you're multitasking sort of 5 to 8, maybe even 10 plus different projects, and most of them don't even come into the future, but you've also got to look into the future, but look into the current. It's that very much the fact of, how much time can you give something if you're just one person? And back in the day when Kevin Feige could oversee 2 to 3 projects a year, which was easy, now he's got to oversee like 5 to 8 plus, maybe more. And again, it takes a strain on a person, and it takes a strain on the quality, and the quality dips. And this is one of those moments where, like, where we have those issues with the pacing. With this movie, we have the issue with the comedy in Thor: Love and Thunder, and that how, like, certain of the Disney Plus shows weren't great. Some of them weren't fantastic. Not all of them landed. Not all of them were a banger. And it comes back to that fact of, we need to kind of bring the MCU back into itself. We need to bring the MCU's like expanded, but we need less fingers, less pies, more condensed, and we're all sort of like looking at what we've got and be like spacing it out. being like, okay, these sort of TV shows, they need to come out this year? No, can we push them back? Okay, let's push them back. Let's work on them a bit longer. Okay, what do we need for this year? So we've got the new Ant-Man movie coming out, and we've got Guardians of the Galaxy, and then I think there's another one coming out this year. So, say for example, we've got three movies. Okay, we've got three movies coming out. Anchorman's already came out. Hasn't done very well at sort of the Rotten Tomatoes scores. The critics didn't love it, but the audience love it, so that's okay. That'll keep them happy and keep it going for a while. We've introduced Kang, that's all good. Then we have Guardians of the Galaxy, which will be the end of the Guardians as we know them. Then we have that. Then we have the next movie, and again we can kind of contain and kind of work from there. And then next year, then we can look at doing, maybe a bit more, some more films. Because I feel like this year, I think we're getting Loki this year and a few others. But the point I'm trying to get is the fact of, if we can contain it more, then that Marvel magic will come back to the movies and to the shows. At the moment, I feel like too many fingers, too many pies, not enough oversight by Kevin Feige, sadly, and small little things like this kind of get out the cracks where it's like it's a Marvel movie and there are Marvel parts in the movie, but when you move away from like Wakanda, when you move away from Teotihuacan, Telecom, it's still very much the fact of it just feels generic. It just doesn't feel Marvel-y to me. And I think that's sort of the issue that I'm getting with the movies as of late, which is a shame. But it is what it is. So that is all of what could have been better. Hold on one second, let me have a drink of water. Mm-hmm. So my overall thoughts and feelings are, I liked it more. I liked it more than the first Black Panther movie. It's more interesting, less boring than the first Black Panther. I still miss Chadwick Boseman. Like I said, this movie is a lot more interesting, a lot more fun. Again, less boring, but again, it's still missing the glaring sort of beacon of Black Panther, which is Chadwick Boseman. Now, again, like I said in the introduction, I understand like he passed away before they started filming this, and then when he passed away, they had to change the script completely and make a completely different film. But it's even though I understand that, and I did say that I was going to go into the movie with the understanding that he's no longer here and try to love and embrace it as it is, which I completely did that as much as I can. But again, it's still very much the fact of I miss him. I do. And this movie does miss and have that big sort of missing hole. Something feels like it's missing, and it's Chadwick Boseman. And there are moments in this film where I'm like, how would his version, how would he, and how would the Black Panther, T'Challa, how would they face Namor? How would they face this threat? How would they handle it? You know what I mean? And I couldn't help not think that. And I feel like a lot of other fans were the same with things like it's all well and good to see how Suri and the Queen and M'Baku and the Dora Milaje, like it's interesting to see how they handled it. But it always comes back to the fact of I miss Chadwick and I'd like to know how Chadwick would have dealt with this threat. You know what I mean? But that being said, they did a good job with this film. They did a good job with the Black Panther name. With the whole sort of Black Panther character. I enjoyed it. I thought it was more interesting, thought it was more fun. There's no real but other than, certain things were shoehorned in, and like I mentioned, but overall I find it an interesting film. But one thing that I found with this film that I liked was that this movie is about mourning and it's about moving on. For anybody who's lost somebody, I've lost a few people, and I imagine a few of you beings listen to this have also lost people or know people who have lost somebody or something in their life. Mourning is different for everybody. Everybody mourns differently. Everybody moves on at different speeds. And this movie is very much is very somber. There are action focused, but the bits I loved the most were the moments where you had those character moments where you could tell they weren't acting. They were just being truthful. When they were saying that I miss T'Challa, when they were saying that I missed my brother, generally I could feel like, yeah, they miss Chadwick. They're talking about Chadwick. They're not talking about T'Challa. They're talking about Chadwick. So I love those moments, and it did hit hard for me, and it was lovely. They dealt with mourning fantastically, dealt with loss fantastically, and it was done really, really well. And I enjoyed that, and I think that's what made me miss Chadwick more was because I could just tell that when they were saying T'Challa, they really meant Chadwick. You know what I mean? Because they missed both the actor and the character, because the character was so beloved, and the reason it was so beloved because it was so well done by Chadwick. You know what I mean? So. Um, I miss him and I miss the character. And I could feel that. So it was really, really well done how they did the whole mourning and loss and moving on. Um, One thing I want to mention that to add into my overall thoughts is that it's something that I can't really talk about in detail. But there is one end credit scene, and I won't say what it is. There's one end credit scene, and I find it. I'm trying to find a way to explain this. I find it interesting. Let's say that I like what they did with it, and when I saw what they were doing, and when I realised it, I smiled. I don't 100% agree with it, but I'm glad that they're doing it. But I can't go into any more detail than that, because again, it will ruin things. But I just like let's just leave it at this. Let's just say that I like what they're doing. I don't agree with it, but I understand as to why, and I understand that if they if they're gonna do what I think they're gonna do, it's kind of clever, um, and it answers to what I would have liked them to do. Um, so they are kind of doing it. But again, I can't go into any more detail than that. So overall, if I had to give this movie a rating out of 10, um, considering like if I gave Black Panther 1, I think I'd give that a 6. This movie, I think I would give it a 8. Because it does improve, it is better, and it does handle it a lot more. And I feel like again, I'm not gonna judge it the fact of it wouldn't I wouldn't say it would have higher scores if Chadwick Boseman was in it because that's not fair because he's not here, so I won't do that. Um, but basing the movie on what it is and what happened and what took place, and the way they dealt with characters and the pacing, and despite the small sort of things that could have been better and the shoehorning and that sort of thing and the whole sort of Marvel magic, I feel like an 8 is fair for this film. Um, I would actually like to watch this movie again, which again is an upside because I wouldn't really. I'm like one thing I forgot to mention in the introduction is that I have on DVD every single Marvel movie up until Endgame, right? The only two Marvel movies that I don't currently own in Blu-ray, or actually at all, is Black Panther and Captain Marvel. Now, I enjoyed both movies, but I didn't like them completely. So I never bothered to get them on DVD. I always meant to, and maybe one day I will to complete the collection. But I stopped collecting the DVDs after Endgame because they all went on Disney Plus. But I wanted the original Endgame, the original Infinity Gauntlet trilogy. I wanted them all on DVD, so I got them all on DVD. I actually collected them through the years, so I've got all of them. But the only two films I don't own are Black Panther and Captain Marvel. But this film I wouldn't mind owning. You know, this is a film that I wouldn't mind watching again. If it was on TV, I'd happily sit and watch it. You know what I mean? So, um, for me personally, I would say that's an upside. But again, you know, still, I don't know. I feel like if when they do make a Black Panther 3, I just kind of hope that where they're going, they stick to it. That if that now they've set up the end credit scene of what the potential future might be, as well as how the movie ends and how certain characters go in certain directions, I feel that if they keep in that direction and they go with what I feel like would be interesting, and I feel like other characters would find it interesting too. I feel like it would be quite well. So I do look forward to seeing Black Panther 3. Um, but we'll see when that comes. I feel like that if that movie is to be made, because I feel like T'Challa and Talakan will play a big part in whatever happens next with Kang the Conqueror. Um, that we will end up seeing a Black Panther 3 before Secret Wars and before whatever they decide to do with the sort of next Avengers movies. So I feel like it'll be interesting to see, definitely. And yes, so that is my sort of review on Black Panther. Hope you all enjoyed it. Hope you liked it. Again, agree or disagree, let me know. But I'm going to go off to the ending now. So I hope to see you in the end. And if I don't, thank you for listening to this episode. So off to the end we go. So here we are at the end. I hope you all liked the review. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at the Nerdstalgic_pod. Leave your thoughts and feelings there. If you agree, if you disagree, if you like the first Black Panther movie, if you missed T'Challa, if you missed Chadwick Boseman, all that sort of jazz, let me know. Again, if you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to sort of like, subscribe, and also drop a comment down below. Same sort of thing with the comment section. Let me know if you agree, if you disagree, if you like Chadwick Boseman, if you miss him, if you like the movie, but all that sort of thing. Just comment down below. I'd like to have a conversation with you beans about this movie because I feel like it'd be kind of interesting. And so you can find this podcast, the Nerdstalgic podcast, on Spotify. You can find me on Anchor Podcasts, Anchor FM, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music Podcasts. You can also find me on Audible. Like I mentioned, I'm on YouTube as well. Just the Nerdstalgic podcast. And if you listen to this on Spotify, don't forget to give me a star rating. If you go on my profile on Spotify and go down to the stars, you have a choice between 5 stars and 1 star. 5 star being the best thing you've heard in your life. Like, it's literally improved your life now that you can go off and be like, join MIT and become a superstar genius. Or 1 star where you know better off than where you was, and to be honest, you feel like you've now dumb. Everybody in this room is now dumber for listening to what I just said. That's a Happy Gilmore reference for anybody there who was paying attention. But yeah, 5 stars, 1 star, 4, 5, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4. Anything that you feel like is fair, please do put it in, because it really does help a lot with the Spotify algorithm. The more sort of star rating, the higher star ratings you are, the more you get seen, and the more views, and then more things I can do, and then more possibilities for ads and that sort of thing in the future. So I would really do appreciate it. And you have been listening to me, your host, Luke. I thank you for joining me. I greatly appreciate you and your time. You've been listening to the Nerdstalgic podcast, and I will catch you in the next one. All right, Beans. Bye-bye.